Just keep it really simple. I think simplicity is the key. And this is also a really simple trick when it comes to mixing to make sure your beat sounds cleaner. What's up guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to show you how to create your drum loops, and I'm going to talk about the sound selection. So these are the topics which I'm going to cover. So first I'm going to show you some Afrobeat rhythms and drum patterns. After that I'm going to tell you something about how you can check in which key the drum is, some common drum mistakes, and a really simple trick how you can humanize your drums, and some various tips and tricks. So I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial. So I'll be using this beat in this tutorial. So first I'm going to talk about some basic Afrobeat rhythms. So I'm going to solo this element right here, this percussion right here, and the drum pattern looks like this. This is one of the most common drum loop patterns. And you basically have two Afrobeat patterns. So it's this one and this one. And this one is more repeating, I think, and this one adds some more bounce. So creating an Afrobeat, I think I can recommend you using one of these patterns. So a lot of the Afrobeat patterns are based on this one. So you could really make some really simple adjustments like this. Something like that. So I've enabled the kick pattern. Something like this. So if you want to create an Afrobeat drum pattern, just start with one of those two drum patterns. So for this beat, I chose this pattern right here, and I've layered it with a lot of elements. So right now I'm just going to focus on the drums. So if I'm using this pattern, I can easily add some more patterns. So right now I've layered 3 drums. And I can really recommend you layering drums. And there is just a really simple pattern which you can add, which goes really good with some bells or just really short sounds. So it's this pattern. It just adds some groove to this beat. And right now you can add some more elements. So I can really recommend you, if you're adding some high frequencies to the drums, instead of just boosting your high frequencies, add some heads, for example. So for example, this one. And right here I've pitched it up, which I think sounds really awesome. You can also pitch drums. If you just play it on C5, it would sound like this. Just makes it more sharper. And you could also add some more elements. So for example, this tambourine, which is used in a lot of Afrobeat tracks. And most of the times these sounds are just used in this part or this part of the drum pattern. So you could create a pattern like this. Or you could create a pattern like this. But in this beat I prefer to use this pattern. And right here I've added another element, which is this sound. And I've also turned it up 1 octave to C6 right here. And in Afrobeat it's also really common to add some toms. So for example, this one. And it's just basically the same as the tambourine pattern, but just more repeating. So like this. So you can create a pattern like this, but you can also create a pattern like this. But I prefer to use a pattern like this. And as you can see, I'm drawing in a pattern like this because there is no clap or percussion playing right here. So as you can see, otherwise it would be empty. And it's just really awesome to add a tom, for example, on this spot. So I've added another drum and I'm just layering it with the other tom. So like this. So just the same pattern. And right here I've added the bell, this one. And you could create a really bouncy melody like this. And it's also really simple to add a shaker loop yourself, like this. So this is a really common shaker loop pattern. And you can also add some rolls right here. So I'm going to enable this one. So it's basically this one, and this one. So really a higher, mid and low tom. These elements will sound like this. And I'm also adding some faster elements right here. So the snare. Just really simple, but I think awesome. You can add some more elements if you want. But I think this is one of the most common drum fills in Afrobeats. So I think which is also really important is to make sure your drums are in key. So there's a really simple trick how you can do this. So just open up the drum. So for example, this tom. Right mouse button on the waveform and just edit an audio editor. So it will pop up right here and then go to this flag right here and then detect pitch regions. And you can hear this tom is pitching down. I can recommend you to look at this part of the drum. And especially in low, and especially when using drum or toms like this, which contain a lot of low frequencies. So make sure this part of the drum is in key with your melodies. And for the kick you can do the same, but I think for especially hi-hats or whatever, it's not really necessary. But especially for the drums which contain a lot of low frequencies. So right now I'm going to talk about the most common drum mistakes. So number one is definitely using too much rhythms. So when picking one of the snare elements, you should really stick with that pattern. So don't add too many layers, just keep it really simple. I think simplicity is the key. So for example, in this beat, the kick pattern is just really simple. But I see some people adding a lot of kicks, something like this. I think you don't really need to do this because you're adding some low frequencies. So for example, toms, which are basically in the same frequency spectrum as your kick. And make sure to use elements which are not in the same frequency spectrum. So add some low toms, add some high toms, but don't just use some low toms and layer them because that would not sound really good. So when doing the sound selection, make sure you pick some high toms, some mid toms and some lower toms. So for example, if you're adding too much low toms, it would just sound really muddy and that's not what you want, I think. So make sure to use a lot of variety when choosing and picking your elements. And for example, when creating this roll, I see some people doing this but not adding some reverb. And I think it's a really easy trick. For example, I'm using the Valhalla Vintage Verb, which I think is a really awesome reverb, but you can also use the Fruity or the stock Fruity plugin. And it's basically all the same, so it doesn't really matter. When doing this, make sure you cut out the low frequencies. So I'm going to show you this in the Reverb tool from Fruity, which most of you guys are using. And you can do this by just this button. And you can see in the top corner right here, I'm just turning up the amount of hertz. So it's basically a high pass filter right here. So I can recommend you to set this one to around 1500 hertz. And for the high cut filter, I just should leave it on the default preset, but you can also play around with it. So make sure to add some reverb, but make sure to cut out the low frequencies, because otherwise your mix would sound really muddy. And one of the most common mistakes which I often see is adding reverb to the snares. You don't really need to do this. I think in Afrobeats it's not really common, but it's really common to add some reverb to one of the percussion which are playing in the background. But when adding it to the snares, make sure you add a little bit, but I can really recommend you to don't add any reverb. on the percussions which are really in front of the mix, and it would just not really sound nice. And the next step is to humanize your drums. So when adding, for example, this drum pattern, this one, to humanize it, play around with the velocity like this. So you could go to note velocity right here, and you can just play around with the velocity to make it more bouncy. So it does not really sound like a computer is playing the drum every time on the same volume, for example. And to humanize your beats even more, you can add some swing right here. So open up your channel rack right here, and right here on the top corner is this knob right here. And this is called the main swing button. And for Afrobeats, I can really recommend you to add some swing, which is between 20 and 30%. And some tips and tricks when it comes to the rolls right here. You can create some really awesome things when going to the control, note panning, and just play around with it. So for example, this one in this pattern to the left and this one to the right. You can do the same with the next one. So for example, this one is on -20 and this one is on +30. So for example, this one like this. And when adding the shaker, and because in Afrobeats, most of the guys are using the same shaker loop, it's just really awesome to layer some shakers. So just create a really basic shaker loop like this, but then in the arrangement, add just a shaker loop. This is a shaker from my Afrobeat sample pack. And just layer these two elements like this. That's how you can create some original shaker loops. And the next step is to use some panning right here. So for example, I'm playing all these sounds. And right here, you can pan your sounds to the left and to the right. So I can really recommend you to link your elements to the mixer and just use a mixer. So right now I'm going to play it and I'm just going to separate the elements in the stereo spectrum. So as you can see, this one is just on mono. You can see this one is already panned to the right and this one to the left. And this one's also panned to the right. And this is also a really simple trick when it comes to mixing to make sure your beat sounds cleaner. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to leave it a thumbs up and subscribe. Also make sure to follow me on Instagram at 7beats and see you guys in one of my next tutorials.